This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. The U.S. government on Thursday imposed sanctions on some 150 companies and individuals it accuses of helping Russia's war effort against Ukraine. Details from VOA's chief national correspondent, Steve Herman, in Washington.
The Departments of State and Treasury have announced a new round of sweeping sanctions on those the U.S. government accuses of sanctions evasion and circumvention to help Russia wage war against Ukraine. Of particular focus is Russia's energy industry, with sanctions targeting the country's energy production and export capacity, as well as Russia's metal and mining sectors. Matthew Miller is a spokesman for the State Department.
The department also designated numerous entities producing and repairing Russian weapon systems, including the Kalibr cruise missile used by Russian forces against cities and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine.
Also sanctioned are those affiliated with the Wagner Group militia alleged to have shipped munitions from North Korea to Russia, and those helping advance Russian malign activities in the Central African Republic. Steve Herman, VOA News, Washington.
A migrant reception center in Italy's southernmost island of Lampedusa is overwhelmed as authorities work to transfer thousands of newly arrived migrants to the mainland. The Red Cross says there are still 4,200 migrants at the center out of the 6,800 who reached the tiny tourist and fishing island within 24 hours in a flotilla of some 120 boats arriving from Tunisia. The Libyan Red Crescent Aid Organization says that the death toll from floods in the eastern Libyan city of Derna has soared to 11,300. The Secretary General of the group says a further 10,100 are reported missing in the coastal city. Mediterranean storm Daniel caused deadly flooding in many eastern towns, but the worst hit was Derna. For additional stories 24 hours a day, visit voanews.com. This is VOA News. Washington is not worried the sanctions imposed on Turkish firms as part of broad action against Russia could derail Sweden's bid to join NATO. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller.
We continue to work with them to communicate that NATO accession is important for Sweden and should happen as soon as possible. And we take President Erdogan's assurances that it will happen at great value. And we don't see these as any way connected, and we don't see that in any way these sanctions should have any impact at all on that accession.
The Biden administration is set to impose sanctions on 5 Turkish companies and a Turkish national on Thursday, accusing them of helping Russia evade sanctions and supporting Moscow in its war against Ukraine. A senior Treasury official said the action comes at a delicate moment for U.S.-Turkey relations, with Washington hoping Ankara will ratify NATO membership for Sweden. InfoWars' Alex Jones is spending a lot of money, but families of the victims of the Sandy Hook school shooting who sued him have yet to see a dime. The AP's Ed Donahue reports.
Jones and his company were ordered to pay more than $1 billion after he repeatedly said on his shows the 2012 Connecticut school massacre was a hoax. Financial reports in Jones' personal bankruptcy case show his net worth is around $14 million, and personal spending topped $93,000 in July alone. Outside court in Connecticut last year, Alex Jones said,
"Doesn't matter if they do a $500 billion verdict, a $10 trillion verdict, a $50 million verdict. You can't get blood out of a stone."
Lawyers for the family say if Jones doesn't reduce his personal expenses to a reasonable level, they will ask the bankruptcy judge to appoint a trustee to oversee spending. The judge decides how much is paid to creditors. Jones says he has done nothing wrong and keeps asking his audience to donate money for legal expenses. I'm Ed Donahue.
The long-running federal probe into Hunter Biden has taken a big step. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Meghani reports.
The president's son has been indicted on federal firearms charges, accused of lying about his drug use when he bought a gun 5 years ago. Hunter Biden had reached a plea deal that would include sparing him prosecution on a gun possession charge as he pleaded guilty to misdemeanor tax charges. But the deal fell apart in July. While defense lawyers argued that part of the agreement remains valid, prosecutors say otherwise. Hunter Biden's also under investigation for his business dealings and could still face tax charges. Sagar Meghani, Washington.
3 artworks believed to have been stolen during the Holocaust have been seized from museums in 3 different U.S. states. The artworks by the Austrian expressionist Egon Schiele were seized Wednesday from the Art Institute of Chicago, the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh, and the Allen Memorial Art Museum at Oberlin College in Ohio. They were all previously owned by Fritz Grunbaum, who died at the Dachau concentration camp in 1941. I'm Alex. This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. North Korea's Kim Jong-un gets a close look at a Russian fighter jet as his tour narrows its focus to weapons. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Kim Jong-un has peered into the cockpit of Russia's most advanced fighter jet at an aircraft factory on his extended visit to the country. Kim's rare foreign trip has raised concerns about banned weapon transfer deals between increasingly isolated countries. He's met President Vladimir Putin and visited weapons and technology sites, underscoring deepening ties between the nations. Foreign governments and experts speculate Kim will likely supply ammunition to Russia for its war efforts in Ukraine in exchange for receiving advanced weapons or technology from Russia. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Supporters of an exiled Iranian opposition group marched in Brussels on Friday on the eve of the first anniversary of the death of 22-year-old Kurdish-Iranian woman Mahsa Amini. The demonstrators, many of whom waved the flag of the National Council of Resistance of Iran in photograph of its leaders, called for the overthrow of Iran's government.
The demonstration of the Iranian people will start again and will, at the end of the day, they will succeed to change the regime and we will have a free Iran.
The European Union has decided not to renew a ban on Ukrainian food imports heading to nearby countries. The move Friday sets up a clash with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania and threatens European unity on supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion. Poland said it will extend its own ban. The EU members have said food coming from Ukraine has become stuck within their borders. Poland's prime minister has reacted by saying that his government will extend its own ban on Ukrainian grain. This is VOA News. Federal prosecutors have filed a motion to stop Donald Trump from allegedly harassing witnesses in his Capitol riot case. The AP's Jennifer King reports.
The revelation came in an order from U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. Special Counsel Jack Smith's team are filing a motion under seal seeking an order to restrict former President Trump from making inflammatory and intimidating statements about witnesses, lawyers, and the judge. Prosecutors are being allowed to file a redacted motion with the names and identifying information blacked out. In the motion, prosecutors claim a narrow, well-defined order is necessary to preserve the integrity of the case and avoid tainting the jury pool. Judge Chutkan wrote that the history of harassment and threats demonstrates a real likelihood that they could suffer further intimidation. In a statement, a Trump spokesman reacted by accusing a weaponized Justice Department of election interference and attempting to deprive Trump of his First Amendment rights. Earlier this week, Trump's legal team requested that Chutkan recuse herself from the case because of statements she has made while sentencing Capitol rioters. Jennifer King, Washington.
Thousands of migrants overwhelm Italy's Lampedusa, Reuters' Sean Hogan reports.
Lampedusa's migrant reception centre is overwhelmed and overflowing. Designed to handle 400 people, it was housing an estimated 4,000 people on Wednesday. Maloney's government has impounded many charity rescue boats, banning them from conducting multiple rescues. Migration data analysis shows 90% of migrant boats arriving in Lampedusa in the last 3 months have come from Tunisia, the closest African country. Italy has sought to improve ties with Tunis, but a recent pact aimed at stemming the flow of migrants has had no immediate impact. A government source said the pact was still not being applied and that Rome was working with the EU to allow it to take effect.
President Biden says his administration will try to help automakers and workers reach a deal. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
The president says nobody wants a strike,
but I respect workers' right to use their options under the collective bargaining system.
Saying while automakers are enjoying record profits,
those record profits have not been shared fairly, in my view, with those workers.
The president says he appreciates that both sides continue working to reach a deal. He's sending Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su and Senior Advisor Gene Sperling to Detroit to lend support. Sagar Magani at the White House.
U.S.-based pharmaceutical company Johnson & Johnson is being investigated in South Africa for allegedly charging, quote, excessive prices for a key tuberculosis drug, bedaquiline. The government-appointed commission that regulates business practices in the country announced the investigation on Friday, along with their subsidiary Janssen Pharmaceuticals, saying they're overcharging for the drug. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. The father of Mahsa Amini was briefly detained on Saturday, human rights groups said, amid a heavy security force presence on the first anniversary of his daughter's death in Iranian police custody that sparked months of anti-government protests. Olivia Chan has more.
State-affiliated media reported arrests of several, quote, counter-revolutionaries and, quote, terrorists across the country. It said security forces had foiled plots to create disturbances around illegal demonstrations. The death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in the custody of the morality police last year for allegedly flouting the Islamic Republic's mandatory dress code triggered months of protests. Iran's official IRNA news agency denied that Amjad Amini was arrested, but it did not say if he was briefly detained or warned. Mahsa Amini's death represented the biggest show of opposition to the authorities in years. Rights group says more than 500 people were killed in the protests, and Iran carried out 7 executions linked to the unrest.
Olivia Chan, Reuters. The top American military officer says North Korea may be able to boost Russia's supply of artillery munitions for the war in Ukraine, but Army General Mark Milley says that's not likely to make a big difference. He made the comments as he arrived in Norway for NATO meetings that began Saturday and will focus in part on the conflict. Milley said the recent meetings in Russia between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin will probably lead North Korea to provide Soviet-era 152mm artillery rounds to Moscow. Milley said that while he doesn't want to play down the weapons assistance too much, quote, I doubt that it would be decisive. For additional stories, visit voanews.com. This is VOA News. An Afghanistan-based nonprofit says it is working with the UN to free 18 of its staff, including a foreigner from Taliban detention. VOA's Tommy McNeil tells us more.
Conditions have become tougher for nonprofit organizations working in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover 2 years ago, with more reports of interference and restrictions on jobs for Afghan women. On Saturday, the International Assistance Mission said it is working with the UN and others to free the 18 people who were taken from its office this month. It did not confirm reports that one of the detained staffers is a U.S. national. Tommy McNeil, VOA News.
Thousands of South Korean teachers are rallying for new laws to protect them from abusive parents. AP correspondent Karen Shamus reports.
Following the suicide of an elementary school teacher in July, teachers across South Korea have been pushing for improved systems to protect teachers from widespread malicious complaints from parents. South Korean lawmakers are currently debating bills that would meet some of the teachers' demands for immunity from child abuse claims. One protester, An Ji-hye, told the AP, I hope that the bills being discussed now will be passed as soon as possible to secure teachers' rights to life. South Korean Parliament is expected to hold a vote to pass the bills on September the 21st. I'm Karen Shamas.
In Atlantic weather, millions of people are under storm watches as Hurricane Lee is downgraded, but bearing down on New England in the United States and also Canada. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
Hurricane Lee is now post-tropical Cyclone Lee, the storm expected to make landfall today in Nova Scotia in Canada, but its immense size means areas hundreds of miles from its center, such as New England, could see dangerous winds, high seas, and flooding rains. Cruise ships found refuge at berths while lobstermen pulled their costly traps from the water and hauled their boats inland, leaving some harbors looking like ghost towns. States of emergency were already declared for Massachusetts and Maine. Lee lashed the Virgin Islands, the Bahamas, and Bermuda before turning northward. I'm Julie Walker.
An aircraft of an Italian acrobatic air team has crashed during a practice run in the northern Turin province. Italian media reported that a child on the ground was killed after the crash on Saturday. Italian news agency ANSA said that the plane or parts of the plane struck a car carrying a family. ANSA reported that a 5-year-old girl was killed and a 9-year-old and the parents were being treated for burns. The pilot ejected and also reportedly suffered burns. Video of the crash shows 9 aircraft in 2 tight V formations before one of the aircraft drops below the others and crashes. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Britain's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly told Sky News on Sunday it's incredibly difficult to deliver aid to Libya, which was hit by flooding that killed more than 11,000 people.
Just at the tail end of last week, I was speaking with the Turkish foreign minister and defense minister about what more we could do as an international coalition to support them. But the governance situation in Libya makes it incredibly difficult.
The oil-rich country has been divided between rival administrations since 2014, with an internationally recognized government in Tripoli and a rival authority in the east where the disaster happened. The general in command of Ukraine's ground forces said on Sunday Ukrainian forces had recaptured the eastern village of Klishivka on the southern flank of Bakhmut, which the Russians claimed control of in January. Ukraine's interior minister also confirmed on Telegram the village was recaptured in heavy fighting. It's several kilometers north of Andriivka, which was recaptured earlier this week. Both settlements were substantially destroyed in months of fighting for Bakhmut. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is on his way home from Russia at the end of a 6-day trip that triggered global concerns about weapons transfer deals. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Kim began his journey back aboard his armoured train from Russia's Far East, following a farewell ceremony at a train station, according to Russian media. It was Kim's second summit meeting with Putin. A previous meeting with him took place in Vladivostok in April 2019, 2 months after Kim's high-stakes nuclear diplomacy with the then US President Donald Trump fell apart. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
This is VOA News. World leaders meet Monday at the United Nations in a bid to salvage ambitious promises to lift the planet's poorest at a time when vulnerable nations are facing a volley of crises. But the Development Summit on the eve of the annual UN General Assembly that opens Tuesday threatens to be eclipsed by growing geopolitical tensions, which will be symbolized by the presence at the meeting in New York of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Many indoor farms in the U.S. are shutting down as their businesses struggle. So why are more being built? AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
Indoor farm eating green technologies Jacob Portillo says there are winners and losers in any industry.
For us, I think that especially as sustainable as we're trying to be, the sustainable competitors, I think, are going to start winning.
Plant physiologist Tom Kimmerer says there are better ways to provide food locally and extend the growing season outdoors.
There's a huge opportunity to invest in traditional farming to increase productivity, reduce the carbon footprint of farming.
Meanwhile, supermarket Kroger says it's expanding its availability of vertically farmed produce. I'm Julie Walker.
Comedian and actor Russell Brand has denied any criminal wrongdoing. As British media reported on Saturday, 4 women had accused him of sexual assaults, including rape, during a 7-year period when he was at the height of his fame. Reuters correspondent Diane Tao reports.
Comedian and actor Russell Brand faces allegations of rape, sexual assault and emotional abuse spanning 7 years at the peak of his fame. The claims against the former husband of U.S. singer Katy Perry emerged from a joint investigation by Britain's The Times and the Sunday Times newspapers, as well as the Channel 4 TV documentary show Dispatches.
What I seriously refute.
Hours before the first newspaper report was published online on Saturday, the 48-year-old posted on social media a preemptive denial to unspecified, very serious criminal allegations.
Reuters correspondent Diane Tao. The United Auto Workers strike against 3 major U.S. major automakers entered its 3rd day on Sunday with no immediate resolution on the horizon. Union negotiators and representatives of General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis were set to resume talks starting Sunday, following the start of the most ambitious U.S. industrial labor action in decades. The coordinated strike comes at a time when Americans' approval of labor unions are at their highest point in decades, even as membership in unions remains largely unchanged. Find more at voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey.